Okay, let's see. We're up, we're live. Got the chat open now in the on my phone. Let's see here. Okay. Waiting for a couple people to come in, but I'll get started either way in just a moment. Just make sure to get the word out. Let's see here. Just opening up my Discord real quick. Let's see. All right, let's see. Almost there. All right. Okay, looks like I've already got a viewer in here. Let's go ahead and close out my other channels. I've got it set up to where I can see when the viewers come in. We're going to be starting the topic here in just a moment. Okay. Gonna close off my Discord too. Just exit out of Discord. Save a little bit of space. Go over to my cam scene. Okay, here we are. Welcome to the RPG College. This is Gamer Sister's channel here on Twitch. Today we're doing a special edition of the RPG College. Hold on a second. You know what? I forgot to do something. Let's see. And there we go. Yep. We're doing a special edition of the RPG College here today. Uh, now, I decided, it's just the only reason it's a special edition here in this case is because it's not my normal day to broadcast. Normally, the RPG College goes on Tuesdays from 6 to 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. And a lot of times that's what I call an open forum show, which means we have no set topic, but I'm open for topics when people come in and bring them to me. Today, we've actually got a topic in mind to get us started. Of course, people are still welcome to come in and ask any kind of questions or raise any concerns that they have, and I'm more than happy to help them out with that. Now, today's topic is um, Session 0 and building your first party. Now, here's the scenario. You and a group of friends, you've gone to a few conventions or game store one-shots, you played a little bit of Dungeons & Dragons, or you've picked up the starter set, or you've downloaded the basic rules, and you decide that you want to finally get an actual party together to play, not just with like pre-gens or little quick throw-togethers, but actually make your own party to play, and one of you has decided to step forward and DM. Now, in this scenario, what you want to do first off is do what's called a session 0. Now, most beginning groups need to have a session 0. The more you know the people in your group, the less you absolutely have to have one, but it's a good idea to have a session 0. And session 0 is where we get a lot of the stuff out of the way so that you don't have it interrupt the game later on. Now, there's several areas of session 0 that we're going to discuss today in more detail. And if, like I said, if you have any questions, concerns, you want to interject something of your own experience as a DM or player, please feel free to do so in the chat. I'm going to try to keep an eye on that and respond as soon as possible. But when I get going talking, sometimes I don't glance down there enough. So please bear with me with some patience. I do think that session 0s are an important subject to talk about. Now, as you can see here, let me go ahead and make it so you guys can see the screen I'm looking at a little bit better here. It is stretched a little bit unusually, but we'll go ahead and still look at that. Now, let's see. You know what? We're going to adjust that screen just a little bit so it looks a little bit more normal. And just move it to the middle here. Okay. And here we go. We're talking about our building your first party. Now, the first thing you're going to do is lay down the house rules. Now, in a session 0 kind of format, this is where you tell people if there's any optional rules that you're using from the game, any rules that you've made up that you think are better reflect how the game is you want to run as a dungeon master. Dungeon master runs session 0. And so session 0 is where you lay down those house rules. House rules can include things like what method of character generation you're going to use and which classes, races, subclasses are allowed in the game. It's going to determine if you use critical hits and critical fumbles and to what extent do you use those. I know a lot of D&D players who play 5th edition D&D, but they'll bring in the Pathfinder critical hit deck and the Pathfinder fumble deck and use those. Older school games where you used to play in 1st and 2nd edition when Rollmaster was still big on the market, a lot of times we would use the Rollmaster tables for things like crits and fumbles and special hits with certain types of weapons because Rollmasters was full of nothing but tables. In fact, it was more a book of tables than it was of its own role-playing game, although you could play it completely independently. So this is where you set those kind of things down. Examples of house rules, we're going to go ahead and use some examples from our store league at Metagames here in Springfield, Missouri. Now, I'm one of the DMs at the league here at Meta, and we do have a couple of house rules that we do use. First of all, in the book, the rule is when you fall unconscious, you start making death saving throws, and if you get hit by a melee attack, it's automatically a critical hit, which means it automatically does 2 failed death saving throws. And of course, 3 failed death saving throws means permanent death. Now, we want to go a little bit easier on our people because we do handle a lot of new people, inexperienced people, and stuff, and we want to have a little bit more survivability than that. So at our store games, a hit on a down foe is still only a single hit unless the roll itself to hit is a critical. Then it is 2 failed saving throws, and of course, still 3 fails gets you dead. So that's one example of a house rule that we use in our games. Another example of our house rules in the games here at Metagames is that we do what's called setting lock. That means that if you are playing in the Forgotten Realms setting, then you cannot use the books for like Exandria from the Tal'Dorei and Wildemount setting. You can't use the books from Magic the Gathering like Ravnica, or Planeswalker supplements because they're setting locked. Eberron stuff is setting locked to Eberron. So that's kind of a house rule setting lock kind of situation. That is one of the things we've determined as a group. Also, because we use what's a shared environment, our DMs have to come together, and when we make special customized magic items, we kind of have to have the approval of the rest of the DMs in the group if these items are going to go from table to table, because that's the advantage of having a league play setting, is you can take your character and take it from this one league game and go to another league game as long as you fit the parameters for the game, and you can jump right on in and start playing. But if you have some really oddball, over flavored, magic items in from one game to another, and the new DM hasn't had a chance to approve those items, it becomes cumbersome. So that's one of our house rules. Okay, so these are the things that you lay down in the first session, the session 0. You often don't even do any playing on session 0, or you just barely introduce the game. But that's the first thing that you do, is you lay down any house rules that you might have. This also includes what structure for handling rules calls in the middle of the game. Now, standard for game management, it's best to make a rules call and move on in a game. You can take a couple minutes to look up a rule if it's going to be quick, or if it's really vital for the situation. And if you go too much further than this, it's going to be really hard to fix, or it's a life or death situation. Then for the characters, obviously not for the players, but a life or death situation for the characters, you might spend a few minutes in game with a rules call. But in general, the rules call rule that a lot of tables adopt is that during play, the DM makes a ruling. That ruling is final for that session, and any conflicts or any questions or anything are brought up after the session or during a break, and when you're not actually playing, and that's when you make a discussion about these, and then possibly retcon anything, especially if it's a life or death. A lot of times we won't necessarily retcon, we'll just going forward, we will set a stable rule based on the new findings of that discussion. In my games, I have a general rule that the DM is the one that does any rules lookups unless he assigns a player to do the lookup. Players do not need to be constantly looking up and questioning every call that a DM makes. If you're going to question calls and stuff, that's fine. Do it outside of the game. In the game, the DM does all the lookups, or assign somebody to look something up. But otherwise, they pretty much, we don't worry about rules lawyering the system too much. And that's, of course, one of my house rules. But that's something we do, and we set that forward as this part of the game. Now, you also put in any classes or races restrictions, dice rolling methods. If you're going to use standard array or point buy, you put it here. If you're going to use the rolled dice method, is it 3 dice 6? Is it 4 dice 6 minus the lowest? Are they done in order? Do you get to place them where you want? Those kind of things are part of the house rules of the system, and you set those down at the beginning of your game. Now, what's off limits? Now we talked about things like what classes and races are allowed and stuff, but that's not what I mean by what's off limits. In this case, we're talking about taboo topics. Now, in general, if it's not discussed, you assume certain taboo topics are just automatically off limits. Except in an all-adult game where everybody is on board, you generally don't talk about such taboo topics as uh, racism, bestiality, rape, uh, torture. Uh, you might allude to, but you don't get graphic about things like that. It can be alluded to and it can be subtly referenced without being a major part of the game. But it could be a trigger for somebody at the table, so you don't even reference it at all. So you do have to establish these off-limit things uh, at the table, and that's the second thing you said. That's not a house rule as much as it's a common courtesy in the social contract that you're coming through. Because you don't know that person that's come to your table might have been a rape victim or might be of a, a culture that's got some taboos that are easily offended. Like, for instance, my personal belief is that you never bring in things like racism, sexism, and things like sexual orientation into the game as far as any discriminatoriness of those. Uh, Now, you can say in a in-game scenario situation, for instance, elves and dwarves don't get along, and they can have a racism in the game that says the elves and the dwarves don't get along, or the dwarves and anything with orc blood doesn't get along, and that can be fine as long as it's clearly identified in the game that this is a racial profile for the world, and that you're not in any way indicating anybody at the game table is being ostracized. And even then, it still might trigger somebody. So you got to lay down what's off limits, what you do not talk about. You don't force people to sit through a majorly uncomfortable situation talking about something they're not comfortable with. And that's the thing here. How you handle things, even things like how you handle things like character death could be in that taboo thing because of the fact that how it could trigger some people's anxieties, even in a fictional setting as a theater of the mind game like Dungeons and Dragons or other tabletop role-playing games. So you do have to set what's off limits. What is taboo in your group? Sexist remarks talking about chainmail bikinis on all the women, things like that, are sexist, and those cannot or will often make a female player at the table or a transgender player at the table, or even not even a member of those cultures could make them uncomfortable sitting at that table and playing that game. They feel like by continuing that game, they're tacitly condoning such use of such talk, and it's not been clearly delineated in the game that this is completely game centric, and it is wrong, but the game is portraying it as wrong to put a spotlight on its wrongness, which you can use things like Dungeons and Dragons to spotlight the wrongness in something as well. D&D is used to counsel people, rape victims, and social anxiety disorder sufferers, and in those cases they're very controlled situations where you bring in some of these subjects, but there's clearly defined in these subjects, either before, after, or during, that the subject matter was introduced as an example of unacceptable behavior and unacceptable use of language and terminology. Okay, so these are the things you don't allow words of negative slurs for specific races, people of specific sexual orientations, and of those natures. You don't allow that at your table because it's going to make somebody uncomfortable, and making people uncomfortable is not what we're here for. And session zero is when you do discuss that, and you kind of have a mini session zero whenever somebody new joins your group. Because if they're new, they weren't there for that initial session zero, so you have to go over with them any specifics that you did in the session zero for everybody else. And you may have to come back and remind people periodically of some of the session zero information too. It's a good idea to have a campaign Bible or a campaign document that people can reference on a semi-regular basis, like a Google Doc that basically lays down these rules, and they can go back into it at any time. A lot of DMs I've seen do that, or they hand out a handout or even a newsletter where they get trade off some of their extra creativity and extra role playing with also reminding people of such taboo subjects and things in the text of this newsletter, or gazetteer is what they like to call them in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, where we're going to go. This means what campaign setting are we going to be in? Are we going to play in a generic homebrew setting where the DM creates everything? Are we going to play in basically the Forgotten Realms, but the DM is creating like the villages and towns, but it's under the underlying premise that you're on Faerun, but he's creating his own adventures on Faerun? Are you going into a book adventure like Curse of Strahd, or uh, Hoard of the Dragon Queen, or uh, Avernus? Are you going to play that? Are you going to play an Eberron or Ravnica? Is this going to be a Tal'Dorei or Wildemount campaign? This is where you're going to go. You do situate that then, and that is something you can interact with your players to do. Not all of this is 100% the DM's choice. The DM does decide the game that he wants to run, and the game itself is the DM's character. But that doesn't mean that you can't take feedback from the players to see what they're most interested in playing in, because that's another thing that Session Zero is to set expectations for the various players and DMs involved at the table. Like for instance, if you're going to do a shared world thing, there's going to be 4 tables with 4 DMs rotating and stuff, but you're all sharing the characters, this table of characters and everything in the same. Then you have to come together and you have to decide which game world you're going to do, or does each DM run a different game world and there's some kind of plane shifting in between tables? Those kind of things are brought in. That's where you're going to play. Are you going to play in Sigil, the world of the Planescape? Are you going to be in the spell jamming thing with the ships in the Phlogiston, which is the sea between the planes of existence in Dungeons and Dragons? Is that what you're going to do? Are you going to just do some simple unnamed world area because you're not sure yet if you're going to go full homebrew, if you're going to go Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or Dragonlance or Dark Sun or what have you? But this is the thing. You do talk about where are we going to go, and you do talk with your players about that and make sure that they're in a world they're comfortable with. They get to play the things they're comfortable wanting to try to play. If everybody at the table wants to play an Eberron because 3 or 4 of them really want to play Warforged characters and artificers and stuff, and the DM has the option of saying, no, I don't feel like I'm not running that kind of campaign, but I'll step aside and let somebody else DM that if you want to, and I'll play, or set out completely. It's up to them. That's an option. You do have to realize though that the DM is running the game, so he has certain veto power over everything else. If he doesn't feel like running a specific scenario for one reason or another, then you can't force him to do it. Just like the DM should not be railroading your characters into going and doing things they don't want to do. But this is where you do decide those kind of things, is during that session 0. Now, next, how big is too big and how small is too small? And now we're getting a little bit closer now. Now we're talking about party size. Constantly on the internet, I'm seeing questions and concerns about how big a group someone should run for Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games. And there's so many different conceptions out there. I'm not going to call them preconceptions, but they do breed as preconceptions in some people, and other people have no idea whatsoever. I will say that the underlying preconception for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and most editions of Dungeons & Dragons has been the party size of between 3 and 5 player characters. Okay, so 3 to 5, with 4 being the dead average. And the reason 4 is the dead average is because in the initial game, there were 4 basic classes. There was the fighter, there was the magic user, there was the rogue, and then there was the cleric type person, the healer. And so if you fill one of each of those roles, you've got a balanced party, in theory. So that's considered the perfect number, but it's not the perfect for everybody. You got to look at what you're comfortable with as a DM, what your party is comfortable with as players, and what the setting is comfortable with, and the situations. How big is too big? Too big is, well, if there's not enough room at the table for everybody to sit down and play, that's probably too big. if you're playing and it looks like one or two people are getting all the spotlight and 90% of the table is getting ignored, you might be too big. If you're playing with a lot of new players, smaller may be better, so you got a little bit more chance, especially in a learning game, to focus down on other people. But that's not always the case. It partly depends on the comfort level, not just of the players, but especially the DM. I started at age 7, and back when I played, there was so few DMs out there that you ran your game for anybody who wanted to play. So if there was 12 people wanted to play, you ran 12 people. If there was 20 people that wanted to play, you didn't have another DM, you ran for 20 people. Now you might start, fielding uh, inquiries to try training somebody else to be a DM at that point, and I know we did. But still, our monthly D&D club game that was organized in the back of a game store was 20 people once a month. But we had a DM and 2 co-DMs. So it wasn't always done by just one person. It just depends on what you're comfortable with. I myself run 12 to 15 players on a regular weekly basis before, including in 4th edition, which is often thought to be one of the longest time-consuming combat round editions there were. It was considered that, and so the more players you had, the longer it took to get through a round of combat. And so to be able to run 12 to 15 people, but everybody still feels special and that they're involved, is a delicate balancing act. So you have to decide what's too big for you and what's too small. Now, in D&D, you can play with one player. And that's a good time for if you just have a single player, you and a buddy want to play, and that buddy wants to be an edgelord. He wants to be the loner, goes out doing little single missions with him and maybe a couple of hirelings, and that's good. You can provide the NPCs and the hirelings for them, and he can be the star of the whole show, and he doesn't have to share the spotlight. And you can do that because you don't have other people wanting to play. So you can play with a single player. I will, however, give you the caveat that most organized play, like for instance Adventure League, does say that you need a minimum of 3 players to really play. If you have less than 3 people show up for an Adventure League game, that game is called for insufficient players, because nobody's allowed to play more than one character, and there has to be a minimum of 3 players in order to play. And so that's a pretty reasonable guideline for this. Also, you got to remember that if you have less than 3 people in your party, you're severely outnumbered when it comes to the challenge rating system in the game, because as I said, one of the underlying assumptions of the challenge rating system is that you're going to have a party of 3 to 5 characters. If you have less than 3 characters, you're severely lacking in action economy in order to do enough damage to take down most monsters. So you're going to end up spending a lot more time running away or hopefully negotiating or sneaking around enemies than you are in direct conflict with them. And that's okay if that's what you're after. But so that's one of your considerations. Now, my general rule of thumb when putting a party together, there's a couple things. I like 8 to 12 as the comfort zone. And the reason I don't like much less than 8 is a couple of reasons. Number one, with 8 characters, I've got double coverage on all 4 basic roles, or I have the potential for double. I mean, everybody could play a fighter. Then you're not getting much double coverage at all. But I have the potential for double coverage in every role. So you don't have just one character necessarily that's doing all the blastiness like the wizard. We don't have just one DPS specialist doing most of the melee or most of the range damage like the ranger or the rogue in the party. You might have a ranger and a rogue. One's doing the melee damage and one's very good at distance damage. And one sneaks up and one puts a hunter's mark on something to increase the damage. Another one might use hex to increase the damage because they're a warlock. So, but you got double coverage with 8 characters. Also with 8 characters, if you have a session come by and 1 or 2 or 3 of your characters are sick or for some reason can't make the session, you still have sufficient people to still play the game under most standard rules. As I said, most standard rules is a minimum of 3 players. With 8 characters, you can have up to 5 people call out and you can still play the game. Now, if you have about 5 people calling, it might be a better idea to go ahead and run the 3 people that showed up into a side quest, or go ahead and just postpone the game till next week and break out a board or card game to kill some time. that's fine. But that's one of the things you consider when you're looking at how big or how small to make your table. I did say you generally want some place for everybody to sit and have their gaming area, and not too far, by themselves and stuff, because you don't want. There are some people who cheat just because of the fact that they feel like they need to justify their life by winning some at all cost, even in a game that has nothing to do with winning. It has to do with survival and the group effort. So they'll edgelord it, and so they want to be in smaller groups. But you need to judge that. Now, the other thing that happens with groups, and another reason I like the 8 to 12 number, is called gamer attrition or lifestyle attrition. And what that means is you start up, everybody's all rearing to go. You've all decided that we're going to play every Tuesday from this time to this time, and then Joe Blow, just to give a name, shows up and says, "I'm sorry, my work schedule has changed. I can't show up on Mondays anymore. Period." Okay, so you've lost a player now. Your 8 players have gone down to 7. You're still viable to work, and you can still have a few call out sick. And that's true through the whole thing down until you get down to about 3 characters. Then it becomes a tough struggle, because one of the people that showed up with the 3 character group might still want to keep playing. They say, "Give us a side quest." Well, the DM's not ready for one, or doesn't want to focus on a side quest. It's not going to happen. But yeah, you decide how big is too big, how small is too small, and what degree of dynamic influence do the players and characters have on your world in this as well. More players, you could have a rotating roster of players, like a adventurers guild set into your world, and everybody's a member of the guild. And each time you come up to do like these little kind of custom, for lack of a better term, one-shots, you go to the guild and you recruit X number of adventurers to do it, and you guys could mix and match yourselves and come in as a different group of people. The guy that's been playing the wizard for 8 weeks straight wants to take some time playing the barbarian for a while, so he makes a backup barbarian character, and the other people, do similar things, and then you can have them all grouped together, and they're not going to be a big level disparity that causes the younger player to want to quit in a huff because everybody else is so much more powerful than them. You do have power creep. It's unavoidable, but you want to balance that out. So that's how big and how small you want to look at your groups. But anybody tells you that anything more than 6 characters is insane or something like that, that's their opinion. That's not yours. A lot of people don't feel comfortable with a group any more than 4 to 6 players. Period. 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 That's all they ever want. And I think anybody who goes higher than that is crazy. We're all a little crazy. I mean, look at our hobby. But go ahead and play what you're comfortable with and what your players are comfortable with. So that's a big situation. Now, next is building our team. Now, during session 0 is when you come together, you bring all the players together around the table, and you get them started to talk about what kind of characters they're going to make. This is, like I said, in our beginning scenario here, this is the first time they're coming in. They're not playing pre-gen characters. They're not playing with, okay, you're joining in late. The party needs a cleric. You have to be a cleric. What is it? No, you never have to tell people that you have to be a cleric. You have to be a healer. But it's nice to have planned out that you have at least one healer in the group. You want to plan out that you have at least one damage dealer, and that's not the same as a brute fighter, but a damage dealer in the group. And that damage dealer could be a warlock, could be a sorcerer, could be a bard that's built that way. It could be a fighter or a swashbuckling rogue. It could be a drunken master monk. What matters is that they're in there, and for the most part, they intend to be there all the time. At least that's what they've told you. If their behavior shows it differently, then later on you might have to deal with that spoiling behavior for the whole group, because it can be toxic. But right now you want to build a party, and you're trying to build a cohesive party that ticks all the boxes. You're not wanting perfect balance, because there's no such thing. You can plan for everything except what the player is actually going to do. No battle plan lasts beyond the first engagement, as Sun Tzu said in The Art of War. So that's not it. But you do want to be prepared as they're trying to move Ellie Mae upward and become a lady in society, and Uncle Jethro is playing along because he wants only the best for his girl. But the granny don't want it to happen. Jethro snuck out on uh, her first mother and left just the mother to raise the daughter. Now he's in the life and he wants to stay in the life, so he's going to be a little bit more cautious about everybody eating the same thing. I'm looking at not everybody eating the thing, but everything doing things together. Example is if you watch the TV show The Santa Clarita Diet, there's a mom and the dad and the daughter are involved, and you've got your team. Each one does that. And dad is the more timid, more cowardly, less extroverted individual who wants to be cautious and check the I's and dot the T's and vice versa in the scenarios and would just kill for a regular day or two in the house. Then you got the daughter. The daughter's got a little bit of adrenaline junkie kind of save the world thing going on. She wants to be, following dad's footsteps and run the knights that hunt the undead in order to cover up for her mother. She also wants to be a social activist and tear down fracking plants and probably throw paint on people wearing furs and things like that too. It just depends on the extremity of her own particular uh, eco knowledge. But these different people play different roles in your party. If you're playing in a D&D game, you want some people to be the heavy hitters, the fighters, the tanks. They can take a lot of damage and sit there and deal out some damage at a decent steady pace. They're not doing the damage that the strikers are doing, that the DPS specialists are doing, because they just got way too many attacks, and a lot of them are airborne, and range attacks do seem to do quite a bit of damage compared to some melee attacks. Um, basic range weapons are die 8, die 10 weapons, where basic melee weapons are die 6 weapons generally. And if you want a die 8 or a die 12 weapon or something, you have to go into the martial weapon types to do that. But so when you're building your party, you take all these things into consideration. So to say you're going to play in Salt Marsh. Salt Marsh is a mostly aquatic kind of coastal area campaigns. Everybody's near the water. There's a few things in the future that specifically deal with things like water, ship-to-ship combat and things like that. So, you might build a party that's built around that. We did one that kind of had that theme when we played Salt Marsh before, and it was talking about I had a dwarf character, dwarven sorcerer from a white dragon heritage. So he was a dragon sorcerer. His white dragon heritage blood let me cast his magic, and he was actually a wild mage. So he casts his wild magic without necessarily a rhyme or reason. But there's certain spells he had specific impact with, like his, Wall of Cold would be more powerful than, say, a non-worshiper of a white dragon's Wall of Cold would be, because they don't have the finite control over the element of cold as explained to the game. So you bring that in there. The party also always needs some kind of healing. That doesn't necessarily mean a dedicated healer, but it's nice to have. It's nice to have more than one of those dedicated healers. But you can substitute the healer a little bit by giving everybody potions of healing, carrying around rods of healing power, paying in town to have curses removed, avocados repitted, all these different things you can pay the store to do and get you ready, but you need to have the party covering these different bases somehow. The more options you give the DM to throw at the party, the better the overall story is going to be. So you build your party, you build your team there. Now, once you've set down your ground rules, you've set your taboos, you've decided how big your party wants to be, you pretty much built your party. What's next on the agenda? Well, next on your agenda is you're going to want to set the hook. Now, if you do any other actual gameplay during session 0, it segues into session 1. So it's really kind of a time management thing. But there's a lot you can do in session 0 with individual characters or 1 or 2 characters together. You can role play their first meetings. You can role play. They're going through the school systems, and one's got an apprentice blacksmithing contract out, and he might have to break that contract to keep going in the world. So he has to determine the value of that contract based against the value of the resources he can gather under that company, and based against what he could make if he did it all alone without an affiliation to a bigger company. So those things are brought together, and then once that's all brought together, you set the hook for the fish. This is a fishing analogy. You got your bobbing little lure in the water, and the fish is starting to nibble on it, and you jerk just the right moment, and the hook grabs the inside of their mouth, and you pull it up, and you've caught your first fish. Whether you save it, or whether you go ahead and what am I saying? I lost my train of thought there. Anyway, lost my train of thought. I'll come back to it if I do. But you set your hook, and that's when you get the people started interested. You might do a little individual, like quick storyline with each player where they go through and you kind of explain how they came together and made everybody, and then you bring everybody back to the table, and everybody's got their underlying understanding of what's going on, but they don't for sure know if anybody else at the table knows what's going on. So that can be a lot of fun, but a lot of challenge too. So you do set your hook, and once you finally set your hook, you've done all these other things, you've prepared, that's when you give the final performance of your play, of your D&D session, of your commercial or TV series or movie. That's when you finally get in and do that. You're out of the production phase, you're out of the playtest phase, you're into the phase where you want to actually get people trying to play the game, meaning to play the game in order to win the game, as it were. So that's when you start deciding how they interact together, how player character abilities would or would not have effect on non-player characters based on certain things too. So you do lay that. So in session 0, we're basically just setting everything up to start playing, and we're not actually going to space for the most part. A small exception being when you lock yourself in the capsule and your abilities have totally locked the door to the castle. So you're probably not going to make your sciencey thing at the school. And I say it that way, but really I was a science nerd myself, so I wouldn't say sciencey in real life. I love comic books and things. But those are the things that you go through. And right now with things like COVID virus and things, we're super cautious out there. You also got to plan things like your trips to the store and stuff with a little bit more detail. So you're not in that store lingering around, checking everything in the item shelf, then just coming back to that area that you already earmarked. Says, oh, look, the hamburger's real cheap. We're going to get 8 pounds of it, and we're done here for the day. That's potential. That's a possibility. But now you've put the whole party together. You've set down the ground rules. You've set down what's taboo. We've decided what party size. We've decided and developed on the party makeup so everybody gets a chance to play. Nobody's stuck necessarily playing something they relatively hate because there's enough players to go in and compare. There's enough cross-pollination of abilities to keep you going too. Like, for instance, the cleric is known to be the big healer in the groups, but a bard in the Valor Pack has similar healing rituals. Still only single class. Even the so-called Nazis had some, issues that they were dealing with. One guy seemed to have a chip on his shoulder because he was stuck in a wheelchair. Another guy kind of blacks out, wakes up, and his cooking rings have been used, but the only tale he hears is about they were perfectly cooked. Yet he remembers he left that on for a while, and it looked like it had gone down to burnt when the child had made him. So you do those things. When you get ready to play a role-playing game, that's when you need to have session zeros, and there's no such thing as too much session 0. Too much prep at this stage, because the more coherent you can make the team at this stage, the better they're going to walk onto that campaign with a little bit of swagger looking for something to do, looking for that adventure hook that you've already got set up, and now they've obliged you by going looking for it. Now you just got to look at where they're looking and make sure that there's somebody there to give them the quest, or somebody there to give them a wild goose chase that leads to you giving them the quest, or me later on with a funky voice. So that's session zeros for everybody. I think it's an important part of the game. We looks like we're back up to 2 viewers in the channel. I hope they caught everything. This will go over to YouTube in the next 7 to 10 days, depending on my timing and everything. But this is in our RPG College series. We were talking about 2 things: running session zeros and building up your first party. And we worked under the premise that this is a group playing. They'd played several times before, some one-shots, some pre-generated characters in some of the organized play sessions, things of that nature. But she, my co-host here, who's not on Mike is rather new to DMing. She would decide how she wants to DM her table, when she wants to do it, what campaign setting stuff. And this session zero is when you relate that information over. So it's a very important session. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get off here because I'm starting to lose my train of thought between various things, which means it's probably time to take a weekend nap. And then maybe I'll come back and run another broadcast. Maybe I'll stream a game. Who knows? But I do want to thank anybody that came in and listened to me today. I can ramble on, listen to my own voice all day long, as my girlfriend will attest, with mild malice in her heart. But she said mild. I knew it. She had to. The peanut gallery had to speak up. But the truth is, I'm here to try to help as many people as possible play this game I love, that I've been playing for 42 years. With 42 years of play, I might have even got something right along the way, and I'm hoping to maybe pass it along to other people. But also, I'm here to build a dialogue. So if people come in and they talk in the chat channel, not just sit and listen, which is perfectly fine, but the chat channel is there so you can interact and ask me specific questions that you yourself might be having difficulty with. I mean, I do try to hit the Reddit forums and some of the Facebook groups to answer people's questions on things, but that doesn't mean it's not better to have a fully interactive thing with a full group discussion. One of my favorite RPG colleges that I do live at the Game Expo here in Springfield is the RPG College table, where I actually do a DM roundtable, either in the panel room or at my table, where I have other DMs there giving their 2 cents worth of games. It's not just me. It can be just me, but it's not just me in these panels, because these are about sharing information, whether you're a DM old or new, or just even thinking about getting behind the DM screen. Or maybe you've been a DM and is playing and playing and playing, but you just finally want to give up the DM role and sit back and be a player, but you haven't been a player in 5 years. So you might need some tips on how to switch gears in your head from being a DM to being a player, and vice versa. And that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help people out with that. Anyway, as always, you can interact with my bot in the channel a little bit. He's not super interactive. I haven't programmed a whole lot into him, but if you put exclamation extra life, he will give you the information on how to donate to Extra Life, which is a program through the Children's Miracle Network for the local area to help kids that are suffering from chronic and terminal type conditions, anything from childhood onset diabetes to cancer and muscular dystrophy and things of that nature, where they have ongoing care concerns. Children's Miracle Network handles that, but the Extra Life is a specific sub-charity put on by gamers and fellow nerds, where we take our love of gaming, our love of nerddom, and we use it to promote donations towards this charity, and then all the funds donated go to your local network and not go into some national slush fund and then get distributed as that national unit sees fit. No, the information, if you donate to my campaign. My campaign's donations go to the Cox Health Network in Springfield, Missouri. They're not going to go to Texas. They're not going to go to Washington. They're going to go to Springfield, Missouri and help the kids. And I take no commission off of that. So, as it says when I just activated the bot, you can donate in the box below my video. Right now, it's pretty eye-opening box. Or you can go to my website, which is just copy the link there. The bot put it out on the Extra Life page, where you can just join my campaign there and make a donation. We are trying to make at least $1,000 donation, but I'd really love to get past that first $1,000 hump, and then move that slider over and still do more by the end of the year. We've got um, a lot of people in need, especially with COVID-19 out there, coronavirus keeping a lot of people stuck in, and people in special facilities like hospital wards, like cancer wards and long-term care wards, are not being allowed to see a lot of their family and friends because of the additional threat of the pandemic. So anything we can do to probably cheer those kind of kids up and stuff, I think it's more than worth it. Thank you so much for being here for my broadcast. If you're here, as I said again, this will be moved over to YouTube in the next 7 to 10 business days to make it available if anybody wants to rehash over the subject. And my regular RPG College will again be Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time here. And it'll be once again an open forum, so come with any topics you want, and we'll discuss them with you. Thank you all for playing. Make all your dice rolls be 20s, and have a great day.